Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a shorter section, and what I'd like to start with as we reach Ephesians chapter 1 through 14, Ephesians chapter 5, 1 through 14, I'd like to do a little compare and contrast with a few different sets of scriptures. So I'm going to go ahead and read something with just directly from scripture, if you don't mind. Let's first read with Ephesians chapter 5, 1 through 5. And then what I'd like to do is for you to turn to Leviticus chapter 19. And I'm going to read a few verses from Leviticus 19. And I want you to compare and contrast these two ideas. Here we go. First, Ephesians 5:1. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love, just as Messiah also loved you, and gave himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. But immorality, or any impurity, or greed must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. And there must be no filthiness and silly talk, of coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving thanks. For this you know with certainty, that immoral or impure person or covetous man who is an idolater has an inheritance in the kingdom of the Messiah and God. As you notice these first 5 verses, it starts off with loving God and what it is to me to be a child of God. He talks about loving. I think he's implying loving others. Well, look at what Leviticus 19 is, that very famous section of Scripture in which basically Yeshua says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." This is the second greatest commandment. But notice how the second greatest commandment is it is put inside of a construct of what's called sundry laws. Look in Leviticus 19, starting in verse 9. Now when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest, nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard, and you shall leave them for the needy and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. You shall not steal, you shall not deal falsely, nor lie to one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, as to profane the name of the Lord, the name of God. I am your Lord. You shall not oppress your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of a hired man are not to remain with you all night until morning. You shall not curse a deaf man, nor place a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall revere your God. I am the Lord. You shall do no injustice in judgment, and you shall not be partial to the poor, nor defer to the great, but you are to judge your neighbor fairly. You shall not go out about as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not act against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. You may surely reprove your neighbor, but shall not incur sin because of him. You shall not show vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. I think Paul is doing a very interesting thing here. He's simply keeping within the confines of a Torah argument in which he is explaining the purpose of love, but he does it in a reverse way. Whereas in Leviticus, it starts off with a number of things that need to be taken care of, the number of things that must be followed. These are the commandments that you follow. But in the end, it concludes in that section with, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Paul starts off the discussion with, walk in love, just as the Messiah also loved you. The same concept. The concept here is what do you do in regards to love? Now, if we just simply do any of those things just for the sake of not doing something, and we don't have love, we're not motivated by love, the love is not part of the factor, then all we do become is just legalistic. So whether you want to become legalistic about the Torah, or you want to become legalistic about Ephesians chapter 5, legalism does not work. Just not doing things for no purpose does not work. It must be founded and based in and continued in and motivated by love. Now, the first part is we have the concept of what are the right things to do and the motivation of love. The second thing we see, starting in Ephesians 5, verse 6, is we come to this discussion kind of a contrast of light and darkness. So in Ephesians 5, 6, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them. For you were formerly darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light consists of all goodness and righteousness and truth. trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them, or in another, some of your other versions says reprove them. For it is disgraceful even to speak of the things which are done by them in secret. But all things become visible when they are exposed by the light. For everything that becomes visible is light. For this reason it says, "Awake, sleeper, and arise from the dead, and the Messiah will shine upon you." Now you see a few things in this discussion of light and darkness. First, what we can say is, we can go all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, and God separated the light from darkness. Now we notice it's the fourth day that we have the discussion of the creation of the sun. So it is understood that many times in dealing with light and darkness, we're not talking about physical light that we see and physical darkness that we see. God has very clearly in Scripture a different kind of light. And it's some of those different kinds of light that I'm going to walk us through a little bit in some different verses. First verse I want to look at is, just 1 second, please. Is in Isaiah chapter 26, verse 19. This is related to Ephesians 5:14. Isaiah 26:19. Your dead shall live, their bodies shall rise. You will dwell in the dust. Awake and sing for joy, for your dew is a dew of light, and the earth will give birth to the dead. Now, another section of Scripture to look at is Isaiah chapter 60. Very famous one. Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. The last part, which says, "And Messiah will shine on you," reminds us very much of the Aaronic benediction. May Adonai bless you and keep you. May Adonai cause his face to shine upon you. The Adonai shining upon you. Here, Paul says, "And the Messiah will shine upon you." He's simply giving everyone a blessing specifically. So as we make these connections, I want to close with this one last section of Scripture in the book of Proverbs, chapter 5. Proverbs chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. It says, "My son, give attention to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion, and your lips may reserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and smoother than oil is her speech. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold of Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways are unstable, she does not know it." So you have this contrast, the darkness being tied in with, the immorality that is mentioned there. In Ephesians, we have the immorality discussed specifically. In Ephesians, he links the immorality to darkness. And so, just in this first section, let me take one step backwards now and put this whole thing back into a context. Remember in chapter 4, we were talking about how he says, "No, do not walk any longer as Gentiles do," and then he begins to say, "Walk in chapter 5." We get "walk in light and walk in love with one another," and then he makes out many listings of things that we ought not to do, the way that we should not live. And then he brings this discussion to light and versus darkness into play, and we again see ways by which we are to walk, ways by which we are to do things. Let me just conclude with the thought that when we're dealing with what we call Torah, remember that Torah contains within it light. The word "or" is in the middle of Torah. So when we say we are following the Torah, all we are saying is that we are showing our love for God, we are showing our love for our neighbor, and as often and as much as possible as we try to keep what we call keeping commandments, all it is that we are saying is that we are trying to obey God. These things that God says not to do, we don't do them because they're bad for us. When we walk in immorality, when we walk in darkness, this is not a helpful way to live our lives. And so walking in the light of Torah, this is simply a way of expressing that we love God and that we try to obey God. Thank you for this week. We'll continue on next week with the continuation of chapter 5.